I used to think birthdays were supposed to be loud, laughter, candles, a chorus of off-key voices singing your name. But that morning, my 18th birthday, the house was quiet, too quiet. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table when I came down, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. My father's coffee sat untouched. My mother kept smoothing a wrinkle on the tablecloth that wasn't there. "Sit down, Noah," she said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. It sounded rehearsed, detached. I remember the way the clock ticked behind me. The sound felt like a countdown. Then she said it. "You're adopted." Just 2 words, but they hit harder than anything I'd ever heard. The world didn't spin dramatically. It just stopped. I waited for the "we love you no matter what," the kind of thing you see in movies. But instead, my father cleared his throat and said, "You're legally an adult now. We think it's time you find your own place." That was the part that broke me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there, staring at the chipped edge of the table, realizing I was being dismissed from the only life I'd ever known. When I finally spoke, my voice came out thin. "Did I do something wrong?" My mother looked away. "You deserve to know the truth," she said quietly, as if that answered anything. They handed me a plain envelope, yellowed at the corners, my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside were a birth certificate and a letter. My birth mother's name was written in elegant cursive, Alina Vasila. I didn't recognize it, but something about the handwriting made my chest tighten. The letter was dated from a hospital years ago. "If you're reading this," it began, "then they've already lied to you." Those words pulled the ground from under me. I didn't know what she meant, or who they were, but I knew I had to find out. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, and walked out of that house without looking back. Outside, the world felt colder than it should have been in June, the kind of cold that starts on your skin and works its way in. That night, sitting in a cheap motel with the letter under my pillow, I whispered her name again, Alina, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I belonged to anyone. But what I didn't know then was that she'd been trying to find me too. I spent the next few days moving through the world like a ghost. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt real anymore. The letter became my anchor. The only proof that I hadn't just dreamed the whole thing. Every word felt alive, whispering questions I wasn't ready to answer. There was an address written faintly at the bottom of the page, almost erased by time: Willow Creek Sanitarium. I didn't even know if it still existed, but when I searched online, it did. A long-term care facility 2 towns over. I stared at the name for hours before I finally got on a bus. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. White paint peeling, tall fences casting long shadows. The air smelled like antiseptic and loneliness. At the front desk, an older nurse glanced at me over her glasses. "Visiting hours are over," she said. "I think my mother's here." I blurted out. "Her name is Elena Vasila." The name froze her. She looked at me, really looked, before lowering her voice. "We don't have anyone by that name on record." But her eyes said something else, something she wasn't allowed to say. I waited outside until the staff shift changed, then slipped through the side garden gate. The halls were dim, lined with doors that all looked the same. Somewhere down the corridor, a soft voice was humming, a tune I didn't recognize, but it pulled me closer. When I peeked inside one of the rooms, I saw her, thin, pale, her hair streaked with gray. She was sitting by the window, tracing shapes in the air, as if remembering something invisible. "Mom," I said, before I could stop myself. She turned slowly, her eyes, they looked exactly like mine, and for a moment, I saw recognition flicker across her face. "Noah," she whispered. My heart stopped. She knew me. I stepped closer, but a nurse rushed in. "You can't be here," she hissed. Her badge read Miller. She pulled me aside, whispering so no one else could hear. "They don't want her to talk. If you care about her, leave now." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the fear in her eyes told me she wasn't lying. As they led me out, I glanced back through the glass window. My mother was still watching me, lips moving silently, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Later, in the dark of the bus ride home, I replayed that moment again and again. Her eyes, the warning, the fear. I thought I'd found my mother, but what I'd really found was the beginning of something far darker. Sleep became impossible after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, my mother, trapped behind that glass, mouthing words that never reached me. I kept hearing the nurses whisper, "They don't want her to talk." Who were they? And why would anyone want to silence a woman who'd already lost everything? I went back to the envelope. I read her letter again, slower this time. Between the lines, I began to see it differently, almost like she'd hidden something there. "They said I was sick," one line read, "but I was only trying to tell the truth about what he did." Who was he? I searched the name on the birth certificate. Dr. Richard Halverson, listed as the attending physician. The name rang a faint bell, like something I'd overheard once in a conversation not meant for me. I dug deeper. There were scattered mentions in old newspaper archives. Halverson Foundation announces behavioral study. Doctors' work on memory disorders receives funding. But then, a few years later, silence, no more records, no follow-ups, just disappearance. It didn't sit right with me. I started visiting the sanitarium every few days, pretending to bring donations or paperwork, just to get glimpses inside. Sometimes I saw Nurse Miller. Once, she slipped a folded note into my hand without a word. Inside was a name, Dr. Halverson. Check the archives. 1994 incident. When I got home, I found an old local paper with a headline that made my stomach twist. Whistleblower nurse claims ethical breach at Halverson Foundation, disappears 2 weeks later. I could feel my pulse in my throat. The date matched the year my mother had been admitted. That night, I called the number printed at the bottom of the article. A woman answered, her voice low, cautious. "This is Rachel. Rachel Ashby. You wrote about Halverson, right?" A pause. Then, "Who's asking?" I told her everything. The adoption, the letter, the sanitarium, my mother's name. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she said quietly, "I knew it wasn't over. He's still protected, you know. The foundation buried everything." I asked her how to prove it, but her tone darkened. "You don't, not alone. People who ask questions about Halverson tend to disappear." I stared at my reflection in the dark window, my own face half hidden by the streetlights flashing by. I'd lost my home, my name, my family. Now I was losing sleep, sanity, maybe safety too. Still, I couldn't stop, because behind those walls, my mother was fading, and if I didn't fight for her, no one would. And that's when I decided I'd go back inside. The night I went back to Willow Creek, the air was heavy with mist, the kind that clings to your clothes and makes every breath feel borrowed. I parked a few blocks away and waited until the last light in the building flickered out. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure someone would hear it. I'd stolen a maintenance badge earlier that week, slipped from a cart left unattended in the hallway. I told myself it was just to get answers, not to break any laws. But deep down I knew there was no going back after this. The halls smelled of bleach and old secrets. My shoes squeaked once, and I froze, listening. Somewhere, a patient was humming, that same tune my mother had been tracing in the air before. I followed it like a thread, turning corner after corner, until I reached the wing marked long-term psychiatric observation. Her door was locked, but the badge worked. Inside, she was asleep, curled beneath a thin blanket. I sat beside her, just watching her breathe, trying to believe this was real. Then her eyes fluttered open, and she whispered, "Noah." Hearing my name from her lips, it did something to me. For the first time, I felt connected to something deeper than blood or memory. "Mom," I said softly, "why did they put you here?" Her hands trembled as she reached for mine. "Because I saw what they did," she whispered, "to the children." My chest tightened. "What children?" She looked toward the corner of the room as if she could still see it. "The experiments," she said. "Behavior control, memory suppression. They called it therapy. It wasn't." I didn't know whether to believe her, but the way she said it, the fear, the clarity, there was no mistaking truth in her eyes. Before I could ask more, footsteps echoed down the hall. I ducked behind the door as two men in white coats entered. One of them said, "Dr. Halverson wants her sedated. She's been talking again." That name, it was like poison. After they left, I knew I couldn't stay any longer. I promised her I'd come back. She grabbed my wrist and whispered something so faint I almost missed it. "There's proof in his files. He kept everything." When I slipped out into the night, the mist had turned to rain. I drove until the sun began to rise, her words looping in my head. Proof, files, everything. I didn't know where to start, but I knew exactly whose office I needed to find, because Dr. Halverson wasn't just part of the foundation, he was its director, and someone else I trusted had been working for him all along. I used to watch couples walking in the park, holding hands, sharing ice cream, living those perfect moments. I wondered if that would ever be my story. Life is funny that way. Sometimes the simplest dreams feel so far away. I didn't want to believe it at first. The pieces didn't fit until they did. My adoptive father, Thomas Brenner, wasn't just some quiet accountant like he'd always claimed. I found an old photo in one of the Foundation's archived newsletters, scanned and hidden deep in a forgotten database. There he was, standing right beside Dr. Halverson, smiling proudly at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The caption read, "Halverson Foundation's new Director of Operations, Thomas Brenner." My hands shook. Every birthday, every hug, every "I'm proud of you, son." All of it played back like a film spliced with static. He hadn't adopted me out of compassion. He'd done it to keep me close, to keep an eye on the one person who could expose what they'd done. I couldn't breathe. That night, I drove back to my old house. The windows were dark, the air still, but I had to see it for myself. I used the spare key still hidden under the porch. The house smelled the same, coffee and dust, and the faint trace of my mother's perfume. In his study, the desk drawers were locked. I pried one open with a screwdriver. Inside were files marked "Confidential," stamped with the Foundation's emblem. Dozens of names, dates, procedures. Some of them were children my age when the notes were written. Others simply labeled subjects. Then I found her name, Elena Vasila. Her file was thick, full of notes scribbled by different hands. Uncooperative, delusional claims of abuse, persistent fixation on staff, misconduct, and finally, written in darker ink, transfer to Willow Creek. Long-term containment recommended. Containment, like she was a threat, not a person. Then I saw another line that made my stomach drop. Subject's child reassigned for observation. Adoption approved. Director Brenner. I stumbled back. My chest hurt, like the air itself was turning solid. I wasn't just adopted by coincidence. I was part of their experiment. I took photos of everything, every page, every signature, and slipped the files into my bag. But as I turned to leave, I heard the soft click of the front door. Someone else was inside. I ducked behind the curtain, just as a flashlight beam swept across the room. A voice I knew too well muttered, "I knew you'd come here, Noah." It was him, my father. He walked closer, his silhouette framed by the doorway. "You shouldn't have gone digging," he said quietly. "You don't understand what you're playing with." My throat tightened. "You experimented on my mother, on me." His voice stayed calm, like a teacher correcting a child. "We advanced science. You're the proof it worked." And that's when I realized I was never supposed to find out. For a moment, we just stood there. Me gripping my phone with the photos still open, and him, calm as ever, the man who had raised me like his greatest achievement. The silence stretched until I finally said, "Worked? You call this working?" He sighed, almost pitying. "You were meant to live a better life, Noah. Your mother didn't understand. She tried to expose us, and we couldn't let decades of progress vanish because of her delusions." Progress? I could barely get the word out. "You drugged people. You erased memories. You destroyed families." He tilted his head, his expression eerily soft. "You have no idea how much we improved lives. Pain, trauma, grief, gone with a single dose. You're proof we succeeded." You never remembered any of it. Something in me snapped. Then why do I remember her voice? Why do I dream about a song I never heard? His smile faltered. That was when I knew he was lying. Before he could speak again, headlights swept across the window. I glanced outside. A car had pulled up. Nurse Miller stepped out, waving frantically. My father cursed under his breath and moved toward me, but I bolted through the back door, sprinting into the night. The rain had started again, soaking through my clothes, but I didn't stop until I reached her car. Miller yanked open the door. "Get in." We drove for what felt like hours before she spoke. "He's not going to stop. Halverson's gone, but Brenner, he's keeping it all alive. The files you found are everything they need to take him down." "Then we leak them," I said. "All of it." She nodded slowly. "There's a journalist who tried before, Rachel Ashby. She's the only one who'll believe you." Rachel picked up on the first ring. I told her I had proof, documents, photos, recordings. There was a pause, then she said, "Meet me tomorrow. Bring everything. This time, the story won't die." That night, Miller hid me in a small apartment near the edge of town. I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt like footsteps. Every shadow looked like his. I thought about my mother, alone in that room, sedated, fading. I thought about the experiments, the children whose names were buried in those files, and I thought about the man who'd called himself my father. By morning, I had made up my mind. I wasn't just going to expose him, I was going to free her, because if I didn't, she'd die in that place. Just another forgotten name in his experiment, and by the next sunset, someone would die, but it wouldn't be her. I met Rachel in a quiet cafe at the edge of town. She looked older than the photo from her articles, eyes sharp but tired, like someone who'd seen too much truth and survived it anyway. She didn't waste time. "Show me," she said. I laid out the files, the photos, the letter from my mother. She read in silence, her jaw tightening with every page. When she looked up, her eyes glimmered with something between anger and awe. "You realize what this means, right? This isn't just malpractice. It's criminal. They built a whole institution on human experiments." I nodded. My voice came out small. "Can you make it public?" She exhaled. "If we're careful. I still have contacts. But once this goes out, there's no going back." I thought of my mother's frail hands, of her whisper, "There's proof." This was it. This was what she'd fought for. That night, Rachel made copies of everything and sent them to multiple outlets. By dawn, the story broke. Halverson Foundation exposed whistleblower evidence surfaces after decades of silence. The world caught fire. Investigations reopened, lawsuits filed, names resurfaced, and Willow Creek, it was shut down within days. When I went back for her, the building was already half empty, guards replaced by investigators. Nurse Miller met me at the entrance, smiling through tears. "She's waiting for you." I found her in the courtyard, sunlight touching her face for the first time in years. She looked fragile, but when she saw me, she stood, slow but steady. "You came back," she said softly. "I told you I would." For a long time neither of us spoke. I just held her, feeling her heartbeat against mine, proof that she was real, that after everything, we'd both survived. Later, Rachel called. "We found something else," she said. "The nurse who disappeared years ago, she's alive. She went into hiding. She wants to help the survivors." It felt like a door finally opening after years of darkness. My mother's case became the start of a movement. People began to speak, to remember, to heal. As for Thomas Brenner, he was arrested, facing charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. I didn't go to the trial. I didn't need to. Some things don't deserve witnesses. I took my mother home. We moved somewhere quiet, near the sea. She hums sometimes, that same tune, but now, it sounds different, peaceful. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling the echo of what they did. But then she smiles at me, and I remember, the past only wins if you let it, because sometimes walking away isn't silence, it's survival.